Good evening and welcome to our COVID-19 update at this hour. I am Ladi Akiridoluale. Here are the highlights. Nation's commercial capital, Lagos, issues guidelines on extended Phase 2 eased lockdown. Cinemas, recreational spots, churches and mosques to remain closed. COVID-19 pandemic and food security. Stakeholders foresee difficulties in mix with insecurity and archaic farming systems. India overtakes Russia in tally of confirmed cases as United States records another record jump in daily cases of COVID-19. We start off in Lagos, where the state government has issued its own modified guidelines and protocols for the extended Phase 2 of the eased lockdown. Governor Babajide Sanwo-Olu announced this today. The governor, while insisting that institutions like places of worship and recreational and social clubs are to remain closed, however, pointed out some modifications.
The nationwide curfew, which still remains in force between the hours of 10 p.m. and 4 a.m. daily, will continue to remain in force. Places of worship will continue to remain closed in Lagos for some more time in the future. All social and event centers, social clubs will also continue to remain closed for now. Our tertiary institutions will continue to enjoy their online academic activities, which are at various stages as we speak. I know that some of them are also conversing with us to see if some final year students will be allowed to have physical opening. That modality, we're still working on it with them, but the online teaching that had started at the tertiary institutions will continue to happen. All the restrictions applying to mass gathering will continue to remain in force. That is, gathering that for funeral or for social events, not more than 20% are still in place. Opening times for government and private offices, markets, supermarkets, eateries are still as expressed before now.
If you are showing symptoms of COVID-19, you are entitled to a free test to determine your status, at least in Lagos. Governor Sanwo-Olu announced this while unveiling the strategy for ramped-up testing capacity within the state. He, however, identified a second group of people who could also be tested.
Going forward, there will be two categories of people who qualify for testing of the COVID-19 in Lagos State. That is, the first category will be those who need to be tested, who fit the case definition for testing and therefore actually require testing. This category of people will continue to receive free treatment that will be at the expense of the state government in our public laboratories, and everyone who meets this case definition for the COVID-19 will be tested. What this means is that if you are showing symptoms of the infection, or if you have had contact with a confirmed case, or if you have exposed yourself in a location where a confirmed case has also been reported, you are entitled to a free testing by the Lagos State government. However, there's a second category, that those who do not meet this case definition, but they want to be tested. They want to be tested for various reasons. They want to be tested for curiosity. They might also want to be tested to meet other requirements. Maybe they want to travel outside of the country, or they want to return to work. We know that there are some offices, there are some organizations that are just for the need to want to determine the status of their staff. They want them to get tested. This category of people will have access to the testing by one of our newly accredited private testing labs. But this will also be at a cost that will be duly communicated by these laboratories.
Meanwhile, graduating classes of JSS 3, SS3, and Tech 3 will expectedly resume on Monday, August the 3rd, 2020. This resumption is predicated on the approval of the federal government and will be dependent on absolute compliance with laid-down guidelines.
Schools and educational institutions will remain closed. We continue to support online teaching of curriculum during this period. However, students in the transitional classes who have the mandatory public examinations ahead of them will be permitted to resume. For revision classes and, of course, for the examination, all educational establishments are to follow the established public health guidelines and protocols for the reopening. We just finished a very long meeting with various stakeholders in the education sector. That is what has kept us for the past 2 hours. And so for the avoidance of doubt, students impacted by these directives will be in the transitional class of JS3, SS3, and Tech 3, the teaching, the technical education schools 3 as well. The commencement date for this will be from Monday, August the 3rd, 2020. Monday, August the 3rd. For JS3, Tech 3 will be the first that will start. And for SS3 and Tech 3 will be the one that will start. But for JS3, we'll wait for another 1 or 2 weeks and we'll see how we take in the first set of Tech 3 and SS3 before they now subsequently will open. This permitted opening will apply only to day schooling. No boarding activity of any sort are permitted at this time. They are all day schooling. Schools authority are expected to spend this period between now and August the 3rd to be able to prepare themselves well and get the rightful directives from our Ministry of Education and the Quality Assurance Office under the Ministry of Education. They have continued to work with them and they will continue to work with them in that order.
Ahead of the resumption of academic activities in schools for graduating pupils, the Nigerian Labour Congress has called for the immediate release of intervention funds to all institutions to enable them provide necessary safety guidelines. In a statement released this evening, NLC President Ayuba Waba noted that the reopening of schools needed to be done with due diligence and utmost precaution given the overcrowded nature of schools, both at primary, secondary, and then at tertiary levels. The Congress President said the government should invite all stakeholders in primary and secondary education, comprising the Nigerian Union of Teachers, Parents-Teachers Associations, Committee of Vice-Chancellors, Provosts of Polytechnics and Colleges of Education, and the All Nigeria Confederation of Principals of Secondary Schools to deliberate on the way forward on reopening the schools. Aviation, medical or port health personnel would screen each passenger for temperature and ensure the use of face masks. That's talking about the protocols to reopen Nigeria's airports for domestic travel. Passengers are required to submit luggage for disinfection before entry into the departure halls. The airport is also, the aviation authorities are also asking travelers to wash their hands as often as possible, and hand sanitizers have been provided for passengers before entrance at the waiting halls and lounges and at the pre-boarding gates at the airports. After arriving passengers, they must, on disembarkation from the aircraft, observe physical distancing as they board the buses. Disinfected trolleys will be made available for passengers to carry their luggage outside. The Federal Airports Authority of Nigeria, FAN, says all these just released guidelines are necessary to achieve healthy and safe air travel. The Cross River State Government has set up a COVID-19 testing and sample collection center at the Lawrence Henshaw Memorial Hospital in Calabar. Speaking with newsmen on an inspection tour of the facility, the State Commissioner for Health, who doubles as the chairman of the COVID-19 response team, Dr. Beta Edu, says the reference laboratory has the intensity and capacity to bring out 8 test sample results from the Gene Expert machine and 96 test sample results from the PCR machine every 45 minutes in an accelerated speed that could enable the state record almost 500 tests every day. Dr. Edu urged cross-variants and residents of the state who may come down with symptoms of COVID-19, irrespective of class, to avail themselves of the sample collection center for testing and sit up on adhering to COVID-19 protocols as the state moves towards the most decisive second phase of COVID-19 prevention control.
The final step in our response, which is the testing, is starting in IDH. Today, samples that have been collected will all get tested in Calabar in our Lawrence Henshaw Memorial Hospital. And that way we would be able to test several cross variants. We are preparing the drive-through and the walk-through testing centers with some other centers across the state. And so if you feel any sign or symptom suspected to be COVID-19, you can just walk in or drive through. You don't need to come down from your vehicle and would immediately get you tested.
Experts in the agricultural sector in Niger State want the government to pay more attention to agricultural development to tackle possible economic recession after COVID-19 is over. They say the overdependence on federal allocation by state governments can no longer subsist in view of current economic realities. Meanwhile, the state government says it has adopted the new agriculture policy and promised to operationalize the document. Emperor Simon has more.
Though Nigeria closed its borders,
over 800 Almajiri children have so far been mopped up and repatriated to various states in Nigeria by the Niger State government. Out of that figure, the state government says 14 of them are expatriates from neighboring African countries. The Commissioner of Education, while briefing journalists at the government house, said that the project cost the state government over 80 million naira. The state government says it is not ready to take the risk of reopening its schools, considering the danger posed by COVID-19. At the moment, Niger State has 116 confirmed cases of COVID-19. 7 deaths have been recorded and 44 persons have been discharged from the virus.
We do sincerely apologize for the mix-up there. Emperor Simon's report on food security and agriculture will probably come in the course of the bulletin. Meanwhile, insecurity and farming systems must be tackled alongside COVID-19 if Nigeria is to avert the impending food crisis looming as a result of the effects of the pandemic. That's according to players and experts in the agricultural sector, who also say that commercial farming will give Nigeria the competitive edge internationally as Africa is set to embrace free trade. These projections are coming against the backdrop of a report by the World Bank that COVID-19 is exacerbating food shortages in Africa. Victor Matthias has more.
though Nigeria closed its borders to halt importation and concentrate on local production, insecurity and lockdown measures have disrupted internal food supply chains and food production. Some experts, however, believe that Nigeria had its underlying issues before the outbreak of COVID-19.
Before now, Nigeria is already faced with also food security issues because of the challenges faced in the agricultural sector across the country. Some of those challenges include infrastructural gap, moving crops from rural areas to the city, post-harvest lack of infrastructure and post-harvest related matters. Also reduced or inadequate processing facility, which makes us rely a lot on importation of food into the country.
Bashir Bagu is an experienced agri-professional who works with farmers and sources as well as processes food. He highlights areas Nigeria needs to focus on to avert the crisis.
Now more than ever, we need to also focus on tackling insecurities. Farmers will not be able to cultivate their crops or work on their farms when they have to deal with issues like kidnaps and herdsmen crisis right now. We have to fragment our production in the sense that we have to look into our farmers as in clusters, not just generally. We have to be able to tell in all these clusters what we are currently producing, what type of varieties of seeds we're producing in those clusters, what inputs are available for those farmers at every given time.
With Nigeria's population projected to double by 2050, commercial farming is also seen as a catalyst for self-sufficiency and global competitiveness.
Look at 2050, the kind of population we're going to have, and we don't have a choice. We need to embrace commercial farming, but we need to be more competitive so that the cost of production is a lot lower, so you can compete globally. The West African region is there for us. We don't even need to talk about going with, Africa is trying to open up now. So very soon there'll be movements, the actual trade agreement. So those movements are going to happen. Who is going to take the opportunity?
So despite projections and warnings by global institutions as well as experts, the availability of food items in markets like this, as well as other markets around Nigeria and even Africa, there is this doubt in the minds of many that the impending food crisis is just a hoax. Hopefully, the reality will not hit them hard before it is solved. Victor Matthias, reporting for Channels Television News.
We'll take a break. When we come back, we'll expand this discussion about food security and talk to an expert and agripreneur about them. Please stay on with us. Thanks for staying tuned. Welcome back to our COVID-19 update. I'm being joined now via Skype from the Gbagada area of Lagos by the former managing director of Farm Crowdy, Mr. Kenneth Obiajulu. Mr. Obiajulu is an agripreneur. Thank you so much for your time. Welcome to the program.
It's great to be here.
Let me begin by saying, from everything we've heard so far, it does appear as if it's the chickens that are coming home to roost, and COVID-19 on its own is not bringing about any real major problems. Is that a correct assessment?
I mean, I think that would not be a valid assessment because with food security and things around this nature, we might not feel the direct impact now, even though we are. We're looking at some 12 months down the line when we'll begin to see the real impact of the supply chain on food availability and food security. But even as it is presently, we're seeing lots of disruptions even in the supply chain generally. So that wouldn't be a valid assessment.
Farmers have not really featured in all the debates and discussions so far. And we're already, for many, people are already feeling the effect of whatever is happening on the farms and with the farmers at the end of the food chain, which is where people are buying in the markets. Can you explain what's going on in between at the moment?
Okay, so basically we've always had smallholder farmers in Nigeria. They've always been experiencing four major challenges, right? The first being productivity has always been very low. Second, post-harvest losses has been at an all-time high. Access to finance for farmers to produce what they know how to produce all year has almost been almost non-existent. And then when the farmers are done cultivating, it's very difficult for them to connect to major markets. Now, that used to be the challenge. Now, with the existence of the COVID-19 challenge, which has broken supply chain and broken market access, most of the farmers don't even have access to be able to move their produce from areas of high concentration, for example, in Nigeria, from the north down to the south, right? There are bans in a couple of states or lockdown in a couple of states that have the highest production of of perishables. Farmers are witnessing in excess of 60% of post-harvest losses for perishable items, and this in itself is the problem because the farmers cannot earn a living now. As a result, it affects their willingness to be able to produce for next year. On the flip side, individuals like myself and yourself that would love to buy this farm produce are beginning to see that there is a shortened supply in the market. And as a result of the shortened supply, the prices of these commodities are beginning to increase. So these are some of the challenges that we're beginning to see where the supply chain is broken, and then every single person has to be able to, is bearing this brunt at the end of the day.
Let's talk a little bit about the health of the farmers themselves. Farming by nature, which is what leads to food security or insecurity, depending on how you look at it, is a labor-intensive activity. So again, it has quite a bit to do with the health of those who are practitioners. What can you say about that since February when COVID came along?
Well, because we've not really, I think the pandemic has also shown and exposed a lot of lapses in the system, right? One of the things that we have focused on for a long time has always been around crop-based insurance, and we never really focused on the farmers. What if the farmers are not well protected? What if there are incidences around their health and they cannot go to their farms? How are they able to cope and all of that? But we're beginning to see that even big insurance companies are beginning to look at areas like micro-insurance products that will be able to cover smallholder farmers to ensure that even when all of these things happen, the farmers have access to at least primary health care that helps and supports these farmers. But in terms of how it has been, we will not be able to generally assess how deep these challenges have been because most of the time these farmers have access to local forms of health care and all of that. So basically it's about how can we wake up to the fact that even with farming, there's a need for us to be able to enforce things like micro insurance that covers smallholder farmers and has the capacity to care for them even at such a time as this.
You're an agripreneur, and I know that one of the things that had always been a difficulty with your line of work had been the issue of access to capital. Now, in view of what has happened with COVID-19, we have government talking about interventions and assistance to various sectors, aviation, health, and all of that. Have you seen anything that would encourage you to look at agriculture as an area where government is actually investing at this point in the aftermath of COVID to prevent some of the things you've already identified as being the problems possibly 12 months down the line?
So I think that one of the very serious things that we as practitioners here must commend the government since its inception has been its focus on agriculture, right? There's been several intervention funds that have been made available to smallholder farmers. But what we feel at this point in time is that these interventions must increase because with food security, it has 4 layers. Food can be available and it's not accessible. Food can be accessible, but it's not fit for use. Food can be fit for use, and all of these things are not sustainable. So we think from our end that the government can even increase its capacity to be able to make these intervention funds available to smallholder farmers and also commercial farmers to be able to increase the production of what they have. And farmers need to be able to be trained in the areas of good agronomic practices to increase that productivity, reduce post-harvest losses, and at the end of the day, we're able to push the produce of these smallholder farmers to areas of lower concentration that have the capacity to pay for all of these things. So I think that there are lots of intervention funds everywhere, but I think that more can be done to be able to improve that productivity and where we are able to produce in excess to be able to feed other African countries and even global markets as well. So more needs to be done, more money needs to be put in the hands of farmers, more reliable seeds, fertilizers, crop protection products need to be made available to farmers to be able to increase their productivity and at the end of the day, increase their livelihoods.
Thank you very much, Kenneth Obiajulu, agripreneur, former managing director of Farm Crowdy. Kenneth joined us on the via Skype from Bagada area of Lagos. Thank you so much for your time and your perspective.
Thank you so much.
Between February 27th, when the first case of COVID-19 was reported in Nigeria, and today, July the 3rd, only 4 in 10 people who contracted the virus have recovered, while 1 in 50 lose their lives. Looking at the latest figures released by the Nigeria Center for Disease Control, of the over 141,000 samples tested so far, there are now 15,693 active cases, with 626 confirmed cases reported out of 3,308 samples tested in the last 24 hours from 20 states. Lagos has the highest infection rate with 193. The FCT has 85 cases, Oyo 41, Edo 38, Kwara 34, Abia 31, Ogun 29, Ondo 28, Rivers 26, Osun 21, Akwa Ibom 18, Delta 18, Enugu 15, Kaduna 13, Plateau 11, Borno 8, Bauchi 7, Adamawa 5, Gombe 4, and 1 from Sokoto. This brings the total number of confirmed cases in the country to 27,110. Okay, at this point, let's do something else at this point. I wonder if we can go back to the Niger agriculture story, if indeed we do have that story. Okay. In that case, let's go outside our shores, shall we? And report from South Africa, where it has reported its biggest single-day jump in coronavirus cases as hospitals across the country brace for an onslaught of patients and officials warn of another strict lockdown. More than 8,700 infections were confirmed on Thursday, taking the country's total count to 168,061, according to Health Ministry data, while deaths rose by 95 to 2,844.
With an average daily increase of confirmed cases of about 7,000 in the past 2 weeks, South Africa is facing a new reality, which seems to have shifted from projected models. President Cyril Ramaphosa, who visited Mpumalanga, one of the least problematic provinces today, to inspect COVID management facilities, says government is worried.
We are obviously concerned about the increased infections in other parts of the country, especially in Gauteng, which is rising exponentially and which could soon overtake the Western Cape. That is a matter of great concern to us.
The storm is here. Just between the last week of May and the end of June, we had 3,000 cases a day when we were worried about 300 cases a day. Gauteng now has the largest number of active cases, and this is something we must build in our heads, in our minds.
The second reality is that unfortunately our emergency department not only are inundated with patients that are coming for acute care, but we are also seeing the trauma load going up more and more with different levels of lockdown.
And the worry is not unfounded, as Gauteng alone has over 50,000 confirmed cases, with a decreasing number of recoveries. When compared to the Western Cape, which still has the highest number of confirmed cases, but Gauteng province has a higher number of active cases. While government tries to beef up capacity to cope, healthcare worker unions are up in arms over alleged staff shortages, insufficient PPEs, and inadequate screening and testing of frontline workers. This, they say, has led to inadequate care for patients in some places.
Yes, we've been procuring and contracting a lot of staff, particularly for our existing facilities like Bara, Tembisa, Kalafong, and all other hospitals. And some of these facilities will also be actually run purely by people who are coming from outside the department. We are also creating a central reserve force which will help us to replenish where there is a shortage and where there is a need to even rest some of our staff members.
Meanwhile, the government is considering a likely return to harder lockdown in some problematic areas in the country, especially in Gauteng province. And there's hope that citizens would adhere more to health safety regulations. To support enforcement, President Ramaphosa has extended the deployment of members of the National Defence Force to communities up till September 2020. From Johannesburg, South Africa, Betty Dibia, Channels Television News.
All right, let's talk to Betty now about the situation in South Africa. She joins us via Skype from Johannesburg, its commercial capital. Good evening, Betty. Nice to see you. Trust you're keeping safe.
Thank you, Ladi. I'm trying.
Let's begin with part of what came out in your report, the preparedness and response strategy to this busting of predictions. Earlier in the year, you had reported that they were expecting the peak to be sometime in September, and they did give an idea of a figure back then, but that seems to have been thrown out of gear by what is happening currently.
Well, things seem to have changed. The models that were projected, there seems to be a slight shift to what we have now. September, they were expecting probably about 80,000. Now by June, we were over 100,000. So what they're trying to do now is trying to salvage the situation by ramping up capacity, strengthening early case detection. A lot of people are going around asymptomatic, trying so contact tracing, quarantine and isolation. There's a maze of numbers that they're quoting about a number of beds to add to what is already on the ground. We joined the MEC Bandile Masuku at the Nasrec. Nasrec is normally an expo center. So now it's been turned into a field hospital where from the visuals, you see that there's some people there already. I think we recorded a death in that place. But they're trying to increase beds, strengthening testing capacity and clearing testing backlogs, because a number of people have tested, but they don't even know their status at this point, and the issue of isolation. So that's just what they're trying to do. And focusing on the hotspots, you have quite a number of townships in Gauteng province in particular, where you have a large concentration of people. And these are the communities that they're looking at to see how they can monitor what's going on there, because with the reduced lockdown, people are throwing a party in some places.
Well, prior to now, I mean, for those of our viewers who are not too familiar with South Africa, kind of give us an idea of this hotspot you talk about. I know that the Western Cape has been in the lead in terms of the number of confirmed cases for quite a while, and Gauteng was a bit behind. Is that being reversed now? What exactly is going on?
We still have the way it works now, we still have the higher number or the highest number of confirmed cases in the Western Cape, even as at today. But now you have a higher recovery rate in the Western Cape and a slower recovery rate in Gauteng. The death toll is still higher in the Western Cape, but in Gauteng, the active cases are more now. That's where they're now looking at to ensure that they bring down the number of active cases, and that way reduce the general picture of how severe the situation is at this point. So Western Cape is still high in terms of the number of confirmed cases, but we can't focus on that. We look at the active cases, that you still have. And Gauteng has really gone high with a reduction in the number of the recoveries, which is a bit higher now in the Western Cape.
One of the things that has come out of your reporting is that just yesterday, 24 hours ago, 8,700 new infections. And in the report that you just gave us, there's the issue of complaints about healthcare personnel being sort of overwhelmed. What are they doing about that? Is there anything they're doing about that?
The issue of, okay, just yesterday we had a protest at the Nkosi Alba Lutuli Hospital in Durban, where they complained about all these things. So the government is saying we're going to employ more people. They're importing and they're locally producing PPEs as well. They're doing quite a number of things, but I guess nobody expected it to like blow up as much as it did, much as they have prepared. So the 24-hour period, we have 9,063 new cases, so they're trying to see, in the case of that particular hospital, the Nkosi Alba Lutuli, they say that over 100 healthcare workers have contracted the virus. So government is saying, and it's doing what it's doing, trying to protect more people, but then so many more people are contracting the virus, probably, which is why they're saying the citizens, the people who are not healthcare workers, they should look more at ways of complying with the regulations. That way, the system, the healthcare system, won't be overwhelmed or there won't be so much pressure. So everybody has a responsibility here while the government is trying to do what it's doing. The people too have to adhere to many of these things, the social distancing and general health safety regulations to save themselves and the people around them.
You talked in your report, albeit briefly, about possibly geographically targeted lockdowns. In the very recent past, there had been some of the parties, the political parties in the country, asking for a reimposition of the total lockdown that was initially in place. Where does that stand now? What is this geographically targeted lockdowns about?
What the authorities are saying is areas that have been identified as the hotspot. They will maybe take away some of the freedoms that have already been given in level 3 lockdown. Take a few steps back, especially the townships. You have Alexandra always propping up. You have Soshanguve, which is a township around Pretoria. Alexandra is in Johannesburg. So all those hotspot areas try to put some restrictions. That may be difficult in trying to balance the lives or livelihoods issue as well. But people say if people die, there will be nobody to talk about livelihoods. But they're looking at that, put some restrictions in areas that are more problematic in order to have a cleaner picture generally. How that will work out. There's a meeting expected tomorrow. And then in the case of Gauteng, they're going to bring it up with the National COVID Command Council. And then that's where we will hear the outcome. Will we go back to level 4 or level 5 generally? Because it's going to be difficult too, policing the targeted or localized step back, in the lockdown levels. So how that is going to play out, we'll get to hear probably by Monday after the series of meetings. But there are other things unfolding now. You have locals sending out some statements saying that all foreign nationals have to leave the country after COVID because they're putting pressure on the hospitals. They're taking all the usual statements. But the government has come out to condemn this this evening, saying that they're seeing this, they've noted, and that they're calling on people to disregard this, and not follow.
Betty, it's grim news mostly from there, and I guess it's becoming grimmer right across the continent because back here at home, more or less the same thing. But thank you very much for your reporting, and I think it's important to say please continue to stay safe out there.
Thank you. You too.
Ghana's Deputy Trade and Industry Minister has been forced to resign for breaking coronavirus self-isolation restrictions after testing positive for COVID-19. Carlos Ahenkora, who is also a member of parliament, had visited a voter registration center in his constituency in the city of Tema before completing his period of isolation. The country is compiling a new electoral roll ahead of elections in December. He says he adhered to social distancing rules, adding that he was asymptomatic. Some Guineans are calling for him to be prosecuted for breaching safety guidelines and endangering the lives of people. The European Union has approved the use of remdesivir for treating patients with COVID-19 within the bloc. The antiviral drug was originally developed as a treatment for Ebola, but has been found in studies to reduce the recovery times of people hospitalized with coronavirus. Remdesivir has already been approved in a number of countries, including the U.S. There's been controversy, however, after the U.S. announced earlier this week that it had bought almost all supplies of the drug from U.S. producer Gilead for the next 3 months. Here's our global update.
In the United States, with 53,000 new cases recorded on Thursday, the U.S. set a new one-day record for new infections. As a result of the steady rise in cases, July 4th Independence Day will look very different this year than the usual huge public firework displays, massive parades, large family reunions, and backyard barbecues. Cities around the U.S. have canceled their annual parades as cases of coronavirus continue to rise in 37 out of 50 states, leading governors to roll back their plans to reopen. In Italy, 11 tourists from the United States were rejected from entering after they arrived at Italy's Sardinia by private plane on July 1st. This comes after an earlier decision that the United States is not on the list of countries whose tourists are allowed to enter the EU starting from July 1st. In 2019, the total number of U.S. tourists in Italy was 4.4 million, spending 5.5 billion euros. In Spain, Antonio Gaudi's extraordinary Sagrada Familia, or Sacred Family in English, temple in Barcelona was disinfected today as it prepares to reopen its doors on Saturday, July 4th, with strict anti-coronavirus regulations. The unfinished temple, which combines Gothic and Art Nouveau styles, will reopen after 3 months in 3 phases.
The NCDC continues to work closely with states. You can find the latest national strategy to scale up access to coronavirus disease testing in Nigeria and other public health advisories on coronavirus disease. The website comes alive with all the information and statistics, with regular updates on COVID-19 regulations and several guidelines as to how to efficiently self-isolate and what it means by social distancing. You can access emergency contacts as well if you need to. A live feed of the World Health Organization's website also has regular updates about the spread of the pandemic. COVID-19 strategy guides the public health response at national and subnational levels, including practical guidance for strategic action tailored to the local context. You can also take a closer look at some of the numbers in real time. Our website, channelstv.com, is live with story updates. That's the COVID-19 update for tonight and indeed for the week. Thank you for watching. I am Ladi Akeredoluale. Good night and stay safe.